A very good morning to everyone and welcome to Whisper Talks. My name is Trishan. Thank you all for attending today's event. For those of you who have attended a Whisper Talk before, a warm welcome back. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, here's a little bit about us. Whisper Talks is a space to expand the horizons of your mind. Every webinar, we call experts from different domains to discuss, examine opinions, issues, problems, and perspectives. Each webinar is an interactive session where we walk away with more respect for each other and a deeper understanding of the topic at hand. If you miss a session, please visit our website or YouTube channel for a full library of past Whisper Talk videos on interesting topics. Today on Whisper Talks, our speaker is Dr. Aditya Deshbandhu from Teacher Plus, and he will lead us through the session in just a few moments. Aditya Deshbandhu is a lecturer of communications, digital media sociology at the University of Exeter, UK. A researcher of video game studies, new media, and the digital divide. He examines how people engage with digital artifacts and seek to understand how these interactions shape everyday lives. As someone who examines digital acts of leisure, his research in the last decade has examined social media and OTT platforms alongside video games and digital cultures. He is the author of Gaming Cultures India, Digital Play in Everyday Life, and the forthcoming The 21st Century in 100 Games. He also served as an editor on the book series Games and Contemporary Culture. Before we get started, I would like to inform our audience that our speaker will be taking questions from you after our main talk. So please leave your questions in the chat or use the raise hand option, and we will allow you to ask the questions in person. I request everyone to turn on your webcam while interacting with the speaker. Now, without further ado, I invite the editor of Teacher Plus, Dr. Usha Raman, to tell us more about Teacher Plus and take the session forward. Namaskaram, ma'am. Good morning.
Yeah. Thank you, Trishan. I hope I'm audible. Yes.
Yes, sure.
Okay, great. So thanks to you and to Vishwa Talks for continuing this collaboration with Teacher Plus. For those in the audience who don't know about Teacher Plus, it's a magazine for school teachers. It's been running for over 30 years, and we address the everyday concerns of school teachers in any kind of school that they may be working in India. And we've had the pleasure of collaborating with Vishwa Talks over the past year or so in bringing to you speakers who may speak to concerns that intersect our interests, right? So between education, culture, and general civic consciousness. So we've had a few talks before in this series, and you can go back to the library, as Krishan mentioned, and take a look at them. And just to make a very, very small correction to the introduction that Trishant gave, Aditya is a friend of Teacher Plus. He's associated with Teacher Plus in that way, but he's not from Teacher Plus. But yes, again, really happy to have him here. He's a former student and continuing collaborator with the department that I work in, which is at the University of Hyderabad. So thanks, Aditya, for being here, and thanks again to Vishwa Talks, and over to you, Aditya.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you for the very kind introduction, Trishant, and Ushan, thank you so much. It's really nice to be here. And before I kind of open up the talk, I would like to thank you all for coming in and joining in on a Saturday morning. I understand the challenges of the weekend, and also, we are all awaiting rainfall daily. So to tune in to a session on video games on a Saturday might be a little difficult. But thank you so much. Thank you for being here. To give you a little bit of a context before I kind of open up what I'm going to talk about. I've been working with video games for the last decade, as Trishant rightly mentioned. And a lot of the work I do looks at not what video games do to people, which the general stereotype is, and the general messages, which is to look at video games as platforms that cause addiction, or as platforms that lead to the not creation rather, but the happening of violence or extremely strong emotions and things like that, which there's a lot of research and coverage about. I look at it as to what people do to video games, how they spend time with them, how they have lives revolve around them, how do they find meaning, and a lot of that. So with the kind of questions I ask, the kind of exchanges I have are very different. So I'm trying to present a little bit of that today, and we'll see how that kind of happens. A lot of the research is from where I'm making these points come from being conducted in India. So while I'm located in the UK at the moment, the last 10, 12 years were at the University of Hyderabad with Professor Usha Raman and also Professor Vinod, who's joined the session today. So a lot of this is grounded findings from India. So please feel free to ask any questions. Do not think that there might be a context difference, or I'm speaking from a position that I may not understand what's happening here, or vice versa, right? So please don't worry about that. So without much ado, let me share the screen and kind of get things rolling. I hope the screen share is coming through. Thank you, Trisha. Yeah. So, yeah. To give a little bit of a context, apart from the research I do and the work I do, I also write a weekly column on video games with a newspaper called Telangana Today. The column's been in action for about 6 years. I write weekly, and one of the biggest things I always keep coming back to is what video games can do for education, and how can we kind of fit it into the way we design courses, the way we design curricula, how can students benefit from engaging with video games. And I'm trying to present here a few of the snapshots here. So let's take a look. Okay. So I would like to begin with a story, right? And this is a story that comes from two friends who I've known for a very long time. I think we've been friends for about 2 decades now. Right? I grew up alongside them in Hyderabad. And for the sake of today's talk, let's call them maybe Shyam and Ravi. I think 2 extremely simple names, right? Let's go with that. Very common Indian names, right? So Shyam and Ravi, the story happens a long time ago, as I was telling you about 2 decades ago. Were people growing up in urban India, 1990s, the IT revolution still hadn't happened. Hyderabad was still not what we call it today. Not we call what it is today. It was a little bit more, what do you say, a smaller city in that sense. For example, it was easier to cycle down from, Gachibowli to Indiranagar in about 7 to 8 minutes. And it wasn't that far from Hyderabad University to that side. So anyway, moving on from there. So the 2 of them were aspiring to become engineers. And ever since I knew them growing up, it was something they always wanted to do. Okay. So with Ravi, his parents were extremely, open about how they wanted him to go ahead with their education. They let him have as many experiences as possible. He used to read a lot. He used to write poetry. He used to, in the summers, he was swimming. In the winters, he was out making stuff, trying to get things happening and all of that. Right. So he was going through a lot of those things, trying to be as creative as possible. Summer camps. The more I thought about him, the more I could keep thinking about how unstructured his childhood was. With Shyam, on the other hand, his parents were very, very focused. Okay? So they were very, very scared about the fact that it was extremely important for him to do well in school. So even before the next academic year started, Shyam would know the syllabus throughout. He would have gone through all the textbooks. He would have gone through all the assignments. He would know what it was to ace the exam, how he would do it. And both of them did fairly okay through school. Predictably, Shyam had some of the best scores possible. I think graduated top of his class in school, went on to do really well through classes 11 and 12, went to one of those elite engineering schools in the city and all of that. Right? And Ravi took his time. He didn't know if engineering was his thing, but because everybody else was doing it, he decided to do that. But one thing that separated the two of them with the way they kind of went through those teenage and adolescent years was Ravi spent a lot of time playing video games because he really liked it, and his parents were quite encouraging with that aspect. So the latest gaming gear and hardware was something he always had. Right? So things like the PlayStation Portable, you would always find at his place, and he was busy playing with them as much as he could. And whenever I would see Shyam and I would talk to him, Shyam would keep telling me, Aditya, there's no time for games. My parents are very serious about it. There's no time. I need to do this. I need to do this. There was a checklist. There was a map laid out for him, and he had to follow that religiously. He would go to school, come back, endless number of tuitions, endless number of assignments, and all of those things. Everything tick, 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 tick. Right? So anyway, you must be wondering what's the point here. Right? So let me come to the point. So about 5 years ago, both of them decided to interview for one of these jobs at an investment banking organization. This is one of those tier A organizations everybody wants to have in their resume. Again, I'm not naming the organization. And when they went there, they kind of realized that the only way to kind of get in through the early phases of the screening process was to go through a gamification test. Correct? So basically, they had to play a game in that kind of scenario, and they had to navigate. So Shyam looked at it, and he couldn't rack his head. He was not able to understand what he needed to do. Right? He kept looking at it. He was trying to figure it out, but this is not something he natively did. Navi, on the other hand, had as much fun with it as possible. And I believe within 3 days, he had a job offer to the bank. Right? I'm not trying to say that getting a job at the bank was probably the ideal way or was the right way to come out of it. But this is something quite interesting that happened to me. And so the moment this happened, when I spoke to both of them after the interview and tried to figure out what really happened, I got two very, very different stories. Right? So for Shyam, it was almost like he had been cheated out of the opportunity. He was like, this is not something you ask in an exam like this. I mean, in a selection process like this. This is not something I'm supposed to know. I was never trained for this. You're supposed to test me for the skills I have. Okay. Ravi, on the other hand, it was all about, I had fun, and that was all that mattered. Right? So there are two very different perspectives to this, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So let me unpack that a little bit. Just some cliches, right? So when you think of the word success and you think of upward social mobility, and you always think that there is a responsibility for us to contribute in society to become successful people. We're growing up or molding the next generations of tomorrow to try and achieve success. You always find cliches like this, right? So always think, analyze, plan, keep trying, keep doing things. But these are easier said than done, right? On the other hand, if you do not look at it only from an Indian context, if you look at it from a global context, again, similarly, there are cliches to success there as well. So you try and talk about what is your preliminary plan towards a career, how you would want to make that plan something more comprehensive. What kind of internships would you like to do? Where would you like to do part-time work? How would you volunteer? How would all of this connect to your goal? But again, these are formulae that don't really guarantee things, right? Because if you look at them not as steps to grow and learn, but rather look at them as, things of a bucket list or of a checklist, then the meaning of the whole purpose is kind of lost, right? So come back to the gamification side that I was talking about. So what really went wrong for Shyam? He did most things right, went to the right places, went to the right institutions, put in as much effort as he could, learned as much as he could. Okay? What really happened? Correct. Why did he not get that one socially desirable job that society deems as probably where he should have landed? Okay, which brings us to the next question: how is gamification out of syllabus in the story? Right? How is this thing that we're not prepared for? Okay, and I'll kind of stop the story here, and let's go back into this. Try and put ourselves in the shoes of Shyam or anybody who's faced some sort of a gamification challenge like this, right? Where you're given a scenario where you need to kind of play a game or play a role or envision something and try to solve this problem, correct? And you're trying to figure out how to navigate that space, correct? There's a problem in our understanding of the challenge in itself, right? So gamification is something that's incredibly huge. A lot of organizations now look at it as a way of trying to understand not just how much people can process information and learn things, but also about how they're willing to act and face challenges. how they're willing to restart, how they're willing to analyze information, and a lot of that. Right. So the problem is it's on a slightly larger societal level, right? So if we go back to that, if we go back to the fact that Sham was very clear all through his childhood, where he kept telling me that games don't matter. This is not something I have the time for. This is too trivial, and there's no time for the trivial. Okay? That also means in a lot of times in childhoods, there's very little time for leisure. There is very little time for play. There is very little time to think of things in non-academic ways, to not think of things that would probably, so every kind of act that you're doing, you're looking at it as a skill that would probably lead to some sort of a career opportunity. Okay? Which also means you're losing out on something. Okay? This focus makes sense. I understand with a population of 1.5 billion, I think, right? With the latest numbers, everyone seems replaceable, right? So you want to have the most number of skills that you can provide. You want to be, I want to make sure that you're indispensable. But this also means that as you're trying to accumulate all of that, there's no time to stand and stare from that iconic point, right? Or there's no time for creative pursuits. So we're basically over time through our curricula, through our understanding of education, cutting some things off. So I was in conversation last evening with a bunch of young people who I play basketball with in the society I live in, who are telling me that apparently in their curricula or in their timetables, there are no dedicated periods for English and languages. Right? So apparently, whenever there's a teacher missing for one of the core subjects, all right, or who's on leave or who's absent, that particular period then becomes a period for English. It seems very, very ridiculous if you think about it. Right? Because English is not just language proficiency. Right? There's also the opening up to ideas and stories and things like that. Right? And these are really fancy schools, which, you know, when I say fancy, I mean in terms of the syllabus, in terms of the vision that they have for their students. Right? So how do we think of something like that? So okay, this problem is twofold. There's one where society, system, families, all of us tell us that games are not important, something I've faced through most of my life as well. Thankfully, it now pays for the bills, so my parents are okay with it, I guess. But jokes aside, the fact remains, when you look at gamification activities, for people like Sean and a lot of other people in society, it's just another test. Okay? You figure out then on how to try and beat it, how to ace it or crack it. Okay? The fun element is lost again, and the opportunity to learn from is lost again. The way we work, the way the country kind of works, I'm pretty sure there are places where people are being trained to ace these gamification tests as well. Okay, to look at it and kind of game it and crack it. But that's what we do with all our exams and we do with all our aptitude tests as well, right? So I think there's a problem there that we're trying to identify. Right? And I think this problem is something that we kind of solve if we kind of embrace games in the curricula we design, in the way we design programs, in the way we design classes. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Okay? So let's go back to try and see what the positive side of games are. Okay? What can games offer players? Okay. So first and foremost, if any of you ever played a game, and if you haven't, I request you to try a game. It doesn't have to be a video game per se, but something even kind of like a board game or something even simpler. Okay. Games are, if you think about it, places that allow you to think out of the box. They allow you to think of new ways, new solutions, creative kinds of thinking to solve puzzles. A lot of video games are heavily puzzle based, correct? So it requires you to think in ways that you generally don't think. And it also means you're taking risks, correct? So all that you've achieved, all you've kind of done so far, you're risking all of that to try and think in a particular way. Okay? So video games allow students or players or people who engage with them to think in really creative ways. Also take risks, knowing that all the time you put into a game could probably go waste because you might not solve it. But is there a safer place to take those risks than say in video games, right? So correct, there's that side. The second thing, there's the whole never give up element of things. Okay, video games, you're bound to die, you're bound to fail, and you're bound to kind of persevere. Correct, you'll come back, you'll try again, you'll go back again and try again. And this is an endless cycle till you succeed. Right? So which means that you're always going to struggle. You're always going to persevere. And it also means that when you face failures, probably not going to stop. Correct? Also means, correct. So each time you fail, you value success so much more. So you value success, you know how to get there, you think through it, you do not think of it as a chance encounter, or you do not think of it as something that is guaranteed to you, correct? Or not something, as a point of privilege, but something that you work towards, right? So that's something students could benefit from. The other element is, dealing with failure. One of the biggest challenges we have seen so far with at least students who are either millennials or in Gen Z is that, their ability to handle failure is limited, correct? And why is that? I have a couple of ideas for that. We'll talk about that a little later in one of the next slides, but this is something to think about, right? So probably places like video games where you fail and keep failing till you succeed probably is one way to look at it. And of course, if you look at video games, there's also places where you are involved in multiplayer activities, try and form friends, try and form bonds, find people you can trust, forge communities, things that probably should have happened in the playing fields, right, in the playing grounds growing up. But again, where are those places? Where is the time for those things? Right? These are bigger questions, right? So as we move towards some sort of an urban country where there are hardly any places for kids to play or young people to play, where do we find places to form friends and find people you can trust? Situations to rely on. Video games could be those kind of places. So think about these as I move on a little, correct? And try and tell you what I've found from my research. Okay, so these are just snapshots. The research is a lot more detailed, but I'm trying to present some sort of bullet points to say. Okay, one such study that I was part of was this 2-year study on the video game Pokemon Go. A lot of you might have heard of it, and if some of you have played it, for a lot of people around the world, it's the first way of encountering augmented reality. Right? So Pokemon Go was huge in India. It was so big that at one point the game developer had to tell them, "Excuse me, we have not officially launched it in India yet. So can you kind of wait till we come for your server?" But when it did come to India, it was a very vibrant community, and lots of people were playing the game in many different ways. So my study or my research kind of looked at it. So I was looking at participants from Hyderabad, Bangalore, Delhi, Chennai, tier 1 urban cities, where and I was trying to understand what makes the game really popular. Okay. Of course, there's a privilege there that young people have access to smartphones, have access to data and internet, of course. But a lot of the information or a lot of the data I was getting from that study was talking about how they were using Pokemon Go as ways to reconnect with society, to reconnect with places within the cities that they lost access to, they didn't have time for. Correct? So how places where they used to go get haircuts, for example, suddenly had value because they could find rare Pokemon. Correct? Similarly, they had reconnected with friends who were playing similar games. Correct? And a lot of them were even using the game to kind of reclaim roads and streets. Correct? Where you can't really play anymore. Right? I mean, if you looked at the traffic in these cities, where exactly do you play? So they were looking at footpaths becoming sites of play, but in the world of Pokemon Go, because there were no other places to play. So this is quite interesting, right? Because leisure and the fact that young people must play to grow positively, that thing is, we cannot separate that, right? The benefits of play for young people is infinite, right? How do we kind of get that back? Right, so this is something that was really, really interesting to us. We began to think about how exactly does play mean for students of the next, next 20 years, next 30 years, right? Where it would become the norm, I guess, for schools not to have playgrounds, or residential societies not to have parks and things like that. Right? Increasingly, it already has. So how do we look at it? Correct. This is something. The next one is for a study. Not technically a study, but a piece I'd written for Teacher Plus, which meant I had to go and do some research. I was looking at people who were playing games like FIFA and NBA, and I was talking to them as to why they were playing those games and how is it that they were benefiting. Of course, they were playing those games because they like playing games, but a lot of them were also people who were actually playing football, who were actually playing basketball. Okay, so they were using the game as a way to try and understand how the sport itself works. So when you play a game like FIFA, you understand how the football club system works in Europe, how the business there kind of works. With NBA, they were beginning to understand how teams happen, how drafts happen in countries like the US and all of that. Correct? So they were looking at all of that. But what I found really funny was a lot of them were also trying moves and skills that they were doing in game on the field, right? Uh, they were looking at video games as places to test skills and then try and get those skills into their own actual play style when they were playing with the ball on the ground, right? So this is quite interesting because generally you would think it would be the other way around, right? So you would play the sport and through the sport get into the video game because the sport's always been there. But with the young people of today, I think the connection is the other way around. You play the video game and use the video game as a way to enter actually playing the sport. So that was interesting. Another angle I kind of looked at was with players of games like Assassin's Creed, Age of Empires, okay, and how they understood history and how they kind of thought about the field itself was really interesting. So if you think of a game like Assassin's Creed, it's very subversive history. It's almost history reimagined. Okay, so with games like that, how young people and students are going back to actually figure out how history itself was written, thought through, and what kind of sources to kind of engage with. That was really interesting. Okay? So that was something I found quite amazing, especially considering if you look back at careers, history is considered to be not one of those rewarding career options, right? Which also means a lot of young people today struggle with subjects like history and geography and stuff. Right? So how do we think about those things? Okay. Lastly, this one is purely quantitative and numeric, if you think about it. So with players of RPG games, role-playing games, first-person shooters and things like that, I was beginning to realize how great they were with numbers and calculations and stuff. So every move they made, every step they took, every time they decided which weapon to go with, they knew how much of a chance they had to succeed at the game. So the way they were processing, basic arithmetic, the way they were processing probability was off the charts. And this is something I found really interesting because all of these, if you think about it, are transferable skills. They transfer to jobs, they transfer to life, they transfer to how we approach relationships. Correct, and these are all really important things. Correct. So, which automatically meant that we probably have to now question when we say games don't matter or games are too trivial. They're not something we have time for. Correct. Because I think we're beginning to lose out on what they can offer if we don't connect. Moving on from there, the bigger question, I'm guessing a lot of you who are listening to me today are also teachers and or at least in capacities, look at ways to teach and are thinking through how you would like to plan, how to teach things, for example. So what can games offer curriculum? And this is, I think, one of the bigger questions we have been grappling with both here and also in my new position in the UK. How can we change how we teach things? How can we change assessments, assignments? And it's been really interesting to explore. So I have a couple of examples if you can see here. One is the game Wordle. I'm sure a lot of you must have given it a shot over the last couple of years. It became really popular during the first half of 2022, also during the pandemic. So the amount of people who have benefited with regards to vocabulary from Wordle has been significant. In my classes, when I mentioned Wordle, I have students who show me, thousands of screenshots of having played the game, talking to me about 5-letter words, asking me what kind of word were you playing today. Correct. I've never seen vocabulary become this kind of fun again. Correct. Especially considering for a lot of us, we think that habits like reading are beginning to become increasingly difficult. To find people who read, for example, right? And to think of vocabulary, to think of meanings, to think of new words seemed so fun with Wordle. The other one example was Nerdle. A friend of mine called Bhargav, who teaches at Manipal, swears by Nerdle and talks about how useful it has been with regards to math and stuff like that. Whenever I try to solve Nerdle, it connects back to the foundations of arithmetic, which I've not touched in a long while. Also, I'm scared of math, but whatever be the reason, the fact that a lot of young people have benefited from games like Nerdle and have thought through how to solve a puzzle like that. Something interesting I also found as I was researching games like these was this game called Worldle, which was about trying to guess countries and places and trying to find locations. Correct. So every time you guess a place with a particular number of letters, it'll kind of give you a geographical location and tell you you're this many degrees of longitude wise, this many degrees of latitude-wise, which would mean for a lot of people, even thinking of the globe or the atlas and connecting back to those things. It was really interesting. Okay, so coming back, so what exactly happens if you introduce games in assignments and assessments? So one of the bigger things I've noticed, at least with some of my modules now, is that we're taking away the stigma of failing, and we are getting people to experiment things, to take risks, and most importantly, try and solve the problem by thinking, hey, will I not thinking, hey, will I get the right solution, but rather thinking, hey, is there something new I can get out of this? Okay? Which also means that we are moving away from that focus of, numerous numbers of tests, right? I mean, if you look at the average school curriculum today, and I think they go through, 7 or 8 rounds of testing in an academic year, correct? And makes you wonder why even are they going through that kind of rigorous testing, correct? And when I was asking parents of people, young people I know, and they keep telling me, Aditya, the school thinks of test scores as data points. My question is that really what it was meant to be? Correct? Do we change the way we think even of tests? Because what value are scores if you have a test every 3 weeks? What is the learning that's happening there? Right? And these are bigger questions to think about. Correct? And something else I found, and this is firsthand through my classes again, it has allowed teaching to become more experience-driven, because as they think through, as they solve problems as games, as solutions to games, or even play through it. Correct? The classroom has become extremely involved. Correct. So students keep fighting back. They're discussing, contesting the classroom space. Correct. And sometimes they just stand back and let them run with it. Correct. So you might be thinking, what kind of games am I talking about? What is it that I'm doing? So I'll give you an example of something that we were working with. Correct. So before that, correct. The big question is, what can we kind of do? I think it's high time that we begin acknowledging that games are here to stay. If you look at the size of the industry, I think it makes more money than the television and film industry combined today globally. So I've mentioned this many, many times with never. So I don't think it's going anywhere. So by acknowledging that they're here and knowing that we can't really get rid of them, if we start looking at what positives we can get out of the medium, I think that's one way to look at it. Correct. Then once we kind of look at those positives and what possibilities that they can offer, if we can involve them in the way we think of classes, the way we plan our sessions, correct, and the kind of activities we want to use, then we use video games as foundations to initiate discussions. And how could that kind of open? That would be interesting. So the one example I was telling you guys about was this thing where I use video games, this one specific game called Decarbonate, to handle this issue of climate change. So it's in this module I teach at Exeter called Handling the Climate Crisis. Correct. So where I kind of ask students if it's even possible to avert the crisis at this point. Okay. So the game we look at is called Decarbonate. It's made by a Czech-based company, and it was funded by the European Social Science Research Council, ESRC. Okay. So the game kind of works with these kind of cards. Correct. And each of these locations, as you can see, industry, ecosystems, people, and science. The game kind of looks at these as pathways to try and solve the climate crisis. Correct. And you see the number here at the top where the mouse is. That's the number of years it will take you to try and solve the issue. Okay. And each time you play and each act you take and each possible card you unlock kind of tells you how you can combat the climate crisis. So what I found really interesting was how they were not just talking about the climate crisis, but also about all the other aspects that go into trying to fight this. How would industry play a role? How would ecosystems kind of be balanced? And could local solutions and indigenous knowledge give us some way of fighting the climate crisis? Correct. Could we look at a change in society, the way we consume resources? Correct. And similarly, could we look at what science could do, what research funding could do? And each of these pathways have their own solution. Right. So I've played this game numerous times, and I got my students to play. But this particular screenshot comes from one of my class students. I think this is a student who solved it the first. Took about 2 weeks to solve it, right? And took him 121 rounds, which means 121 years of that simulation to solve the climate crisis. And he went with something called the global oasis. While the game itself, right, is only a simulation and does not mean if you follow these steps, you'll actually avert climate crisis. The fact is that couple of sessions on this game and talking about the climate crisis in this way meant they were connecting to so many more disciplines than they originally were, right? So we were talking about economics, we were talking about industry, we were talking about science and technology, and all of this in a communication class, right? So we were talking about virtual reality, we were talking about, is there the possibility of a planet B where, all of us could kind of go and colonize and probably move there. And we had some interesting discussions on what would make it what would colonizing a new planet actually change and stuff like that, right? So the value of learning that was happening from something like this was off the charts, right? So how do we look at that? Okay. So I'm beginning to wind down because I think I'm close to the end of my time limit as well. Just a couple of pointers to think of. What can we do, right? So all of this is fine. I've come, I've spoken, right? But what can we do? Okay. So as parents, for those of you who who are parenting young people, who have young people in your lives, one thing to think about is, what is it that we can do? Because video games are here to stay. What is it? How do we adapt to something like that, right? So can we show an interest in what our children do with regards to leisure? Can we not disconnect the moment we realize, hey, they're playing something in their game, or hey, they are in their headphones, they don't have time for us? Can we not turn away on our end as well? Can we actually take a step forward and talk to them and engage with them? Correct. Can we find ways to share those spaces with them and find activities that could interest you and them? Okay. So this is something I've seen in the West a lot, and I don't know if it's that common in India. But a lot of families I know in the UK, for example, now spend 2 to 3 hour window playing Mario Kart. They call it family Mario time or stuff like that. Right? And it's been something extremely popular. And it was interesting, but it also meant a lot of the parents knew what games the kids were playing, right? And it was almost like a family coming together kind of activity. And it was interesting to think of that. Right? The third element, because it's not just video games, there are also other digital leisure options, platforms like OTT, streaming cultures. Correct. Even if you look at something like Instagram's Reels and try to understand why people spend so many hours on Reels, it would be important for us to understand what exactly Reels are, how do they function, what makes them so, I wouldn't use the word addicting, but what makes them so powerful that we lose track of time with them, right? And these are things to think about. Correct. And is it possible for us to try to experience them before drawing conclusions, before saying, hey, this is not something that you're supposed to be engaging with. If you do this, who's going to do that? Right? How are you going to get a job playing games? Stuff like that. Can we kind of experience them? Can we figure out what is it that they're doing? Give value to their experience, and then try to find a common ground of sorts. I think the big element here, this is something Professor Raman has been talking about. There's Devina attending today's session. Devina has been talking about as well. Digital media literacy. This is essential. And I think if we can take steps as parents to kind of understand what digital media can offer and try and understand what video games are, what are those spaces, probably then we are not just connecting or understanding what children are doing, but we are also aware of the possible challenges they're facing in those spaces. Okay, so as teachers, this one's a little more simpler, I guess. We need to stay open to new ideas for, disseminating information. Video games are those platforms; they are disseminating information. Depends on us to figure out what kind of information. Right. So that's why. So it's important for us not to tune out of this conversation. Okay. Can we use discussions in classrooms to kind of engage in also non-academic activities, not just stay limited to the academic and the next test and the next exam, because there's always going to be one of those, right? Okay. So the last bit is we are always going to be, because of the positions we have in society, going to be looked up for opinions, for expert advice and stuff like that. Correct. Can we also have a more nuanced perspective? Correct. Can we change the way we think about these things? Right. So lastly, of course, as students, some of you are listening to this, as students and you're tuning in, please know that games as such are designed to maximize play time. They have been designed so that you spend as many hours in them as possible. Please know that. They're also been designed to make sure that you're engaged to the fullest. Correct. And of course, all of this is leading to, so even if you're playing a free game, to try and get you to spend some money. Right? So know these boundaries, know what the limitations are, and decide what is it that you want, right? So probably you decide how you experience sites of play. It's your activity of play, right? How do you think so? So I'll stop with that. Thank you so much. Please let me know if there are any questions.
Thank you, Aditya. That was amazing. I could relate to so many of the pointers that you said because I used to do a lot of gaming as well. I learned a lot about nature from a lot of games, different kinds of herbs, how you move from, say, fur to leather to metal armories to different kinds of weapons, everything. You learn so much about evolution, you learn so much about nature and the focus. The focus into gaming is really intense. I mean, it can distract you from the rest of the world. So yeah, this was a great way to bring about balance to both the worlds. Uh, Thank you for that amazing talk.
Yeah,
Uh,
my pleasure.
just before we start with the question and answer session, I'd like to request the audience to take a 30-second poll to answer, uh, 30 seconds to answer a poll for us. The purpose of the poll is to help us understand you a little better so that we can curate the topics better. Uh, you can also let us know in the chat box how you found out about Whisper Talks. If you're a subscriber or if you heard about it through friends or family. While you take the survey, I would like to express my gratitude to everybody who has joined us today for their presence and contribution to making this webinar a success. I'd like to express my gratitude to the speaker, Dr. Aditya Deshbandhu, for taking his time to taste the event. Um, Before we start with the question and answer, I'd like to say a few words about Vishwa and what we do. So we are an integrated crowdfunding platform and crowdsourcing platform. We are an online platform for everyday change makers and social champions. We are aiming to help everyone to find the support they need in their efforts to fulfill dreams for themselves and for others, and in process make the world better. We are also having some Vishwa Talk Junior and youth events coming up. So anybody from different schools or representatives from schools and colleges who want us to conduct events in their schools, you can reach out to us and we'll bring these talks to your campuses. We also have Vishwa material campaigns going on. Lately, we've been getting a lot of calls for material donations, and we've been currently accepting all the donations at our Banjara Hills office. And we'll soon have another material collection and donation distribution drive. There are a couple of fundraisers going on the vishwa.org website. Vishwa has been conducting Annadhanam every Friday at NIMS Hospital, close to NIMS Hospital, and also near Basavatarakam Hospital. A lot of people from different states come here to these hospitals for cheap and better treatment for their relatives. And a lot of these families are underprivileged and they skip meals while they stay here. They stay on the sidewalks, on the lawns of the hospitals. So a lot of different organizations have been providing meals in the afternoon to the family members of the patients, and Vishwa has been doing the same. We have a fundraiser on our website. You can contribute in your own capacities to assist us and help us assist others better. I'd like to move on to the question and answer session now. And that brings me to our first question from Dr. Sonali Bhattacharya. Quoting the question, but experiences and processes too need to be quantifiable if they are need to be assessed and put on report cards. So how do we go about this?
Yeah, I think there are two ways to this, right? So again, say if we assume quantifiable means it is uniform, that is not right either. Correct. So for example, one of my biggest challenges over the last 6 months has been to try and explain to undergrad admissions office in the UK, how students get 99 in English and MBA, right? And right, well, does their 99 equate to the 70 there? Right. So, I mean, jokes apart, that's one side of it. I also strongly feel that it's a lot of times, at least in my time when I was still growing, when I was going to school, the report card had both a qualitative and a quantitative side. Correct. While you had scores on how much you got in the exam, there were also comments and observations that teachers made of how you kind of took part in class or how you contributed to discussion. Like mine would always say, does okay, but is extremely talkative. Correct. I mean, there was room for the qualitative aspect to come into the report card as well, is what I'm trying to say. So can we do a little bit of that? So while you document how students are willing to take risks, engage in non-academic activities. Right? The problem is if you make it quantifiable again, it becomes another element on the scorecard. So we have experimented with this, right? We have experimented trying to bring physical education into the report card. What happened? It also got down to, can you get a 95 in physical education? Can you get a 99? What can I do to get the highest score in physical education? It became less about staying fit. It became less about integrating fitness into our life. It became more about what can I do? Something similar happened with, I think ICSE used to have something called SUPW, Socially Useful Productive Work. Correct. And I remember going to school and I was an ICSE student. SUPW reports were written in the last 2 days because they had to be written. Right. So much for social change. Right? I mean, in that sense. Right. So I think if we make it quantifiable again, if we make it to the report card again, I think we are falling back in the same vicious cycle. I agree with you. There are ways to kind of document it. Yes, because I think all things need to be documented, right? But I don't think we should make that the only core facet. That shouldn't be the guiding principle or the foundation around it. Right? So I hope that answers your question.
Yes. There's another question. How to change the mindset of Indian parents when it comes to video games? They always say no.
Yeah, that'll take time. Right? It'll take time. You will have to, what do you say? The onus also lies on the students and the children as much as on the parents. Correct. So sometimes you might find that parents may not open up and talk to you about it, may not allow you to play games. Correct. On the other hand, is there a way that you could reach out to parents and tell them, hey, I'm going to do this, but I'm only going to do it for this much time in a day. Can I also do other things? Is there anything else I can do to kind of balance this out? So, for example, I failed at this as a child growing up, which is why they sent me off to boarding school. But later on, I mean, when I did come back and when I did my master's and PhD, I mean, a lot of that research and a lot of that work was done actively playing games around all the time. But I still managed to make the whole process productive, right? So I think as students, we are smart ourselves. We need to figure out what we want from games. Correct? If we're going to play games just for that half an hour, 45 minutes in a day, can we tell our parents and tell them that this is the period that we're going to play for, and stick to that kind of a family contract, if you want to call it. Okay? If we go the other way around and tell them, excuse me, this is not something. I'm going to play games. Is that okay? And then spend probably all of your Saturday playing games. Then it's always going to be problematic. So it's a balance, I guess, where both parents and students are equally accountable. How do you make that balance? I think is the dynamic of a family, right? How do you figure that out? We've done it with TV, right? We've done it with computers. We've done it. We're doing it in Netflix now. I'm sure we can do it in video games as well. It's just that how do you navigate that space?
A question from Mr. Surupaneni Prasad, a very regular audience member for Vishnu Talks. Thank you, sir, for being here. I could appreciate the merits of what you have conveyed. Does it lead to pulling away children from the habit of reading books? After all, the world has seen the greatest of innovation and creativity through the ages in all spheres of life without computers, leave alone video games. Books and even comics in the good old days had an innate quality of kindling your imagination. Just wanted to know your thoughts on this.
I don't think it has to be one or the other. It can be both. And I think that's where the element is. So what I really like, for example, is the element where you talk about imagination and storytelling, right? So these are precisely what video games are doing as well, right? So a lot of what we teach, even on how to design video games and how to think through gaming, is the element of building the story, building the narrative, looking at characters, looking at how it reflects society and vice versa. Okay, so that part hasn't really changed from, say, writing the novel. It's just that the interaction in it has kind of changed. Okay, in terms of language, in terms of vocabulary, in terms of mystery, suspense, you'll find all of that probably in video games too. Okay? But yes, you're not reading. You're not physically turning pages. I understand. You're digitally doing it with a controller in your hand or on an iPad or something of that sort. But if you look at it, the core essence, the storytelling, the imagination, the form and style are different. I do not disagree on that. But a lot of that also has similar grounding. While, again, I would reiterate, if storytelling and imagination is what you're looking for, then it's very likely you'll find an intersection that people who play video games are also people who read loads of books. Right? So we find time, right? So at least to the participants I was talking about in my research studies, all of them were avid readers of fiction. They would read comics. They would read, books on young magic and young fantasy and stuff like that. They always had time for that. And a lot of times, the games they played were connected to them. So I think it would be nice if you look at it as a connection rather than either this or that. But one thing I'll agree with you that you have rightly said, video games will remain more engaging. And the book seems stationary in some sense. But then it's also in the eyes of the reader. Can they unlock that layer of captivity when they read this? I hope I've answered your question.
Wonderfully answered. There's a question from Om Singh. Hello, sir. As a newbie Unity developer, I want to ask how much the gaming industry will change in the next 10 years, according to you, with continuous advancement in the technologies such as AR, VR, etc.
I'll be very honest. This is something we are extremely engaging with right now. We're looking at how the gaming industry will kind of change in the next 10 to 15 years, because a lot of it also changes the way we are telling stories. At least in the West, we are beginning to see projects happening where we do not see filmmaking different from game making or interactive entertainment development. So we are seeing all of those kind of combine and come together. Correct. So there are huge projects that are being funded by creative spaces in the West that are precisely looking at this: how filmmaking, animation, video game development, VR, AR, MR, also the new XR, that is experiential reality, or what you call the extended reality. How do we look at all of that coming in together? Can we form that what we call some sort of convergent storytelling platform, if you want to look at? So they're looking at it from a variety of dimensions. They're looking at it from performance, drama, theater in one way. If all of that can be elevated. They're looking at it from storytelling, from character development, all of that as well. They're also looking at it from design and engagement, correct? And they're looking at it from play, for example. One slight hiccup here is, at least with the current cost of living crisis and stuff, we are seeing AR, VR, and MR kind of slow down. So I don't know if that is going to happen, because that is going to happen the way it was supposed to. It might happen a little later, because Microsoft and Google, who are the biggest players in the space at the moment, have kind of closed down their mixed reality project and stuff like that. But again, Apple has announced their own infinitely expensive headset, so I don't know how that will kind of open up. But I think at least for the next 20, 25 years, there's a huge space in the gaming sector to continue growing, because it's about the stories that you want to keep telling and you want to keep building on, right? I think from an India, if you're thinking of making games because you're working with Unity and you're looking at stories you want to tell, it is a novice market, right? It's there for the taking. We hardly have any new big industries taking space. The closest we can get is to see what super gaming is doing within us and all of that, which will happen over the next 6 months, 6 to 8 months. Right? So I think, yeah, you should keep trying and it'll be really nice. Let me know what you come up with. I'd like to give it a shot. Yeah.
All right. So I wanted to share some experiences myself also. When it comes to books in gaming, a lot of games are based on books. And what you get to experience is you get to be the protagonist in the book, experience his journey, and you actually reach the end of the book as the game ends. So that's a wonderful connection between books and uh, the games. What when you mentioned Pokemon Go, it definitely made a lot of youth connect with other younger people, made them explore parks, campuses of school, made them literally physically move from point A to point B to explore and unlock more characters. Uh, it was it was a very different shift in the world of gaming, where AR and VR also came into the picture. I have one doubt, like how does one go about encouraging professional gaming?
Yeah. No, this one's a tricky one, right? Especially with that new online gaming bill that's being drafted and the discussion there. See, professional gaming, Trishant, is going to have to come on two tiers. Okay? One, you first need what we call an active community of players who are not playing just to play, but are playing to kind of, as Sonali says in the chat, master the game. Right? You're playing it to master the game. So when you're mastering the game, you're not just playing it to win-win, but you're also playing it to understand how the underlying code that programs a game is functioning. Correct. So the what you call the professional players or the esports players or the ones who are playing at the meta, right? The term they use is the meta. Is they know what move must be made at what second because they know how the through continuous playing they know how the program code's been written. Now, to arrive at that, you need a community of players who have gone through it, who have shared experiences with younger players, and who have vibrant spaces of discussion. So you had this in India at least between 2005 to 2010 and 12, when games like Dota, as you were mentioning, right? You used to play Dota. And Dota 2 were big. So you had places like Spawn and Begumpet.
Yes.
Correct, right? You had the places in America where you had really, really well-to players who were talking to younger players, nurturing them, communities forming, and who would play hours and strategize, think, and process. That has kind of ended a bit because of multiplayer games, where gaming now happens in the house. Correct? It happens in your rooms, it happens. So the community angle kind of comes up. You think streaming will kind of bring that, it's not happening on that level. Correct? So for India's professional gaming to kind of take off, you need organizations willing to forge this, where players are talking day in and figuring out what the next meta is. And if you want to know how professional gamers become professional gamers and then look at games as livelihood options, their challenge is to know the meta before the rest of the world knows, because knowledge is information, right? So by the time there's a new meta, these people have moved on to the next. And right? So correct. So that takes significant infrastructure. And when I say infrastructure, I don't mean in terms of equipment. I mean in terms of communities, in terms of knowledge sharing, in terms of openness and transparency, right? Which also means that people willing to say, "Hey, I would like to game for the rest of my life." Right? Now, where do you get the confidence to say that? That's a bigger challenge, right? But so I mean, we're seeing that conversation change. I think maybe in the next 5 to 8 years, we'll have to figure that out. The Valorant community has been quite vibrant, right? And we're seeing that's changing. So I don't know if it will lead to something meaningful, but it will be a journey worthwhile to take.
Answered wonderfully. Thank you. Just before moving on to the other questions in the chat box, I'm going to give a brief about the upcoming Visual Talks before we close the session. I'll close the session in 12, and then we can continue with the question and answer session. So on 24th June, we have Radhika Iyer Talati from Ra Foundation, and she's going to be talking about balancing body and mind, embracing the power of mudras for well-being. Um, Radhika ma'am, she's a cancer survivor. She's also the founder of an organic cosmetic company called Anahata Organics. She's the trustee and founder uh, uh, of Ra Foundation, which teaches yoga and ancient Ayurvedic rituals to people. On 1st of July 2020, 11 a.m., we have Dr. Sarat Kumar Damuluri from Bay Park Resort, Pema Wellness. He's the Chief Medical Officer over there, and he's a senior naturopathy doctor, and he's going to be addressing aiding women's health with natural medicine. Right after that, we have Dr. Gayatri Upalapati from Roshni Trust. She's a counselor at Roshni. She's going to be talking about self-care practices for women. This session is going to have a little bit of an art and craft part included as well. On the 22nd of July, we have Pujita Krishna from Feet on Earth, and she's the artistic director of Feet on Earth. The topic is dance as rituals, examples from India and the world. The date and time is 22nd July, 11 a.m. Lastly, please take a moment to subscribe to Vishwa Talks to get alerts on every new and exciting talk, exclusive events, and access to the Vishwa community. Follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn for future updates. Do not forget to follow Teacher Plus on Instagram, Facebook for future events and updates. Do follow all of the activities and books and magazine coming out from there. I'd like to request Usha ma'am to ask some questions if she'd like to have. Just
Yeah, no, I really don't think I have any additional questions. I think Aditya covered it quite well, because I think in terms of approaching the whole field, not just of video games, but also digital culture, I think to approach it from the standpoint that it's here to stay. And we need to understand how young people are engaging with these phenomena. And the thing to do is to see whether they are escaping from something or going into something to learn and to be engaged and, to have fun. And I think if we're able to find that and discern that, how we deal with it has its own answers. So if it's an escape, it could be a problem. If it's engagement for fun and enjoyment and learning, it's a completely different thing. And I think by and large, the second bucket of activities is probably more common. And it's the rare instance where it's an escape and where, we really need to approach it with a different set of tools. But thanks, Aditya. And I think there are a few more points in the chat. So if you want to give, the audience the opportunity, that would be great. But thanks, Aditya. Really enjoyed it.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting. Yeah.
Thank you. There's a few comments. There's a comment from Dr. Sonali Bhattacharya. But in competency-based learning, we are looking at mastery achieved. It is a descriptor-based parametric evaluation, and all the skills you mentioned can still be measured.
Yeah, I don't disagree on that. Of course, no matter how difficult an element can be, you could draw a scale or a rubric and end up measuring it. Okay. The question is again, would you like to? Dr. Sonali, there's also the difference between how you approach it, right? So when I look at mastery, correct? So I measure mastery, or rather, I look at mastery as a way of, your ability to adapt when the thing you have mastered in kind of changes or transforms. Okay? Now, how you would design a rubric to measure that? How would you bring the change about? Okay? That's very, very different because our definitions and understanding of mastery are itself different to look at. Okay, so a lot of times what happens is all the intentions for which we design measurement scales and rubrics and criteria are, the intentions are brilliant and there's a reason to it. But that over time, those rubrics begin to signify the mastery rather than measure the mastery. And I think that is something we don't want to go down. Right? So for example, if you were to say evaluate somebody delivering an extempore for a minute, correct? And your four criteria would be good start, ability to make an argument, use an appropriate example, and to end well. Correct? Now, all those four things on its own does not mean a good extent. Right? Somebody might do all of those four well, but all of those four might not be connected. So how do we look at something like that? So that's the one thing I'm only warning against. Of course, we will always have measurement criteria. So how do we kind of look at measurement as just one way to understand something and not the whole thing? That's the only thing I was talking.
Yeah, there's a lot of testimonials thanking you for the session. Coming on to this question by Vandana Hela, what age can kids start playing games?
Okay. Yeah, this one's a very interesting one. I would say probably after 6 or 7 years of age, not before that, which is a little difficult considering most of the prepubescent kids that we know are generally, with an iPad in hand most of the time, right? Now, when I say this, when I say 6 or 7, I looking at it in the sense that they need to know or be able to understand what exactly the game is offering. Right? So you want to be careful because you do not want their lives to be internalized with games right from day one. Because then I do not know if they're able to critically question games. Right? So probably if they come to games a little later, where they're able to process and kind of understand what is it that a game wants, they are at a better position. I'm just wondering. Of course, we don't have answers to these questions. What's the right age? Correct? And we won't for a while because even if we know people who have been playing games since they were probably 2 years old or 3 years old, we do not know how they kind of think of games, say 10 years from now, 15 years from now. So these are going to be longitudinal studies. But I would for a while recommend probably not let them be immersed in games or engaged with games before the ages of 5 or 6. At least let them have some sort of development of motor skills and the other sensorial skills, correct? Through engagement with the offline before they kind of go deep into the virtual video game world of it.
Thank you. There's a question by Om Singh. Since the inception of PUBG in 2018, there has been a huge interest in the professional gaming esports scene in the minds of our youth. But technical gadgets are still a thing blocking the path of many of our players.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely agree. Right. And I think one of the big shifts has been the fact that a lot of the esports scene in India or the professional scene in India is on the mobile phone. Correct. A lot of our pro gamers, even if you look at somebody like Mortal and his success with PUBG, and other players who are playing Call of Duty Mobile and all of that, right? All of them have been playing it on the mobile phone. And I think mobile phones will, for a while, remain as democratic platforms for games, correct? Because you could technically buy a smartphone for about 8 to 10,000 rupees, and if you can arrange Wi-Fi at home, then it becomes a little easier, correct? But I don't see that the gadget problem solving anytime soon, correct? So I think for a country like India, if we want to look at pro gaming for the moment, and we want to tap into the wide mobile gaming base that we have, mobile is the way to be. Correct? So PC gaming, I don't know if we are there for that professional level yet, because the costs there are significant. Similarly, on console gaming, I do not know if we have the right community for something at the moment. So yeah, I think you're spot on. PUBG is where it is. How do we calculate it? Trishant, you're muted.
Sorry.
Yeah.
There's a message from Richa Vinod. Thank you so much for this session, Aditya sir. Especially important to have this discussion as both a parent and an educator. And I really appreciate the idea of having a more nuanced opinion.
Thank you.
I mean, yeah, the chat is now flooding with testimonials. Uh, I'd like to bring this point up. Usha ma'am told us about, how going into gaming shouldn't be like a form of escape, because that sure does lead to addiction. Uh, I've seen this one strange thing. I used to get beaten up black and blue when I was 17, 16. If I, ask for a phone, like I want to use a phone, call my friends, play games or whatever. Nowadays, uh, probably parents my age or slightly more younger than me, they give phones to their kids when they're like 2 or 3 years old, just so that they can do their own work peacefully. Now, this is a habit that I have seen amongst my cousins, amongst how do we deal with this? How do we go about and like I mean getting them back to, you know, not to
Yeah.
do that.
No, this is a really important question, and it is something we are grappling with because the pandemic did a lot of this as well. Correct? Because you knew you were working from home, you knew everything was in that compact space. A lot of people felt giving their children a mobile phone probably was to get away from spending time. And this is something that happens. So I've seen friends, as you rightly said, right? People a little older than me. Right? When they walk in home, the first thing they do is they give their phone to the kids, right? And the kid is in the phone playing away, right? And while you take the time to unwind and stuff. Okay. Now the question then becomes, as you rightly said, the escape. Who is escaping whom here? Is the parent escaping the what do you say, the interaction with the child? Correct? And is the mobile phone then an escape device for the child, or is it for the parent? Or, I mean, what exactly is happening? And these are bigger questions, right? Correct. So at least from what I have seen, because smartphones with children is now impossible to separate. Right? Around the world, we're seeing this is going to happen. Right? And a lot of people are still debating what's the right age to give a child their own smartphone. Okay. I think the numbers are somewhere between 12 and 14, something. Right? Now, in India, where everybody owns everything, right? So if a child is given a phone to kind of like go spend time, do your thing, come back when you're done, right? And the child thinks this is something that is legitimate. The next question will be, why can't I have the phone? Yeah, when I'm not supposed to, right? Because so far I've been getting it at your convenience. What are the limits of your right? And that becomes really, really difficult because you've broken a boundary. How do you raise it back? And as a parent, right? Again, I'm not a parent, so I'm not coming from that empathetic standpoint. But this is a bigger question to think of. Right? How do you raise that boundary again? Right? And that becomes difficult to kind of navigate. So I would say every time you know that you're giving your phone to your children, you be very conscious of what they're doing. You know what kind of games they play. You know what is it that they're doing with your phone. It's your phone at the end of the day. Right? So try and supervise, be with them, choose, give them a game and tell them to play it and play it with them. Show them probably how to play it, compete with them on it. Right? So it becomes a bonding activity rather than an escape. And can we then shape the engagement from there? Right? So the child also knows what to do with the phone at the time. So this is something also I've encountered, and this is not just in gaming per se. A lot of the young people I speak to, when I speak to them about video games, I also ask them, how is it that they navigate social media when they suddenly decide, okay, today is the day I'm going to join Instagram, or today is the day I'm going to join WhatsApp. Okay? Who's told them how to navigate those spaces? Who's told them how to understand, how Instagram functions? No one, right? There's been nobody to guide them to that. And when they log in and suddenly the whole world collides, how do they make sense of it? Right? So again, we go back to the idea of digital media literacy and what can we do? Right? So escape on both sides, I guess. We have to be careful. Yeah.
There's a comment from Mrs. Anjali. I am still worried about the parents. they are shut out of technology because they may not have a natural knack for it. In such scenarios, supervision is even more difficult.
Yeah, the natural knack bit, as you said, Anjali is very right. Uh, Now the challenge here is what is A1? If you do not have a natural knack for tech, correct? And you realize that your child probably has. What is stopping one from probably going and asking them, hey, what is it that you're doing? Can you tell me what you do? Correct. What is stopping us from learning with them? Correct. That is a bigger question, right? So, like for a lot of times, I'm beginning to encounter this now. At least till the last couple of years, every game that was being made under the sun, I knew what was being made. I knew how engagement was happening. I knew how people were playing. Right. The last couple of years, once blockchain gaming kind of came in, I realized I no longer knew what is it. Okay. So when I was trying to understand that thing, the first thing I did was I found the young people who are playing that game. Right. So when I say young, I'm talking about 17, 18-year-olds. And I asked them, is it all right for them to kind of teach me how to play? I figured them out, then I learned, and then I began to play with them. But of course, I'm required to do that because it's research, it's my work, it's my expertise, I'm supposed to know. Okay. But then isn't it the other way around as well? And now it might sound reductive, but they are your children, right? I mean, it's your parenting time, it's their childhood. Shouldn't, nothing's stopping us from going and asking them, hey, can you tell me what you're playing? Can I play it with you? Right? I don't know if they would say no, right? Unless you have made it a point to criticize them for playing to the point where they're ashamed of playing and then they don't want you in that space. Because by then, I think you've done too much damage. So probably the other way out is, is to share the fact that you're not, you don't have the natural knack and see what you can do about it.
Wow, thank you so much. I have one last question from my side. Um, it's in the last 3, 4 years, 5 years, 7 years per se, we've seen a dramatic increase in gambling games. You've seen online gambling games opening up in India, whereas like gambling is not really legal. You see so many portals supporting rummy, poker, which is not precisely the same type of games that help you strategize or something, which is more luck based and a lot of money is involved. A lot of youth gets addicted to such things, and now because UPI, GPay, and all these things are so easy, kids can like directly pay if they know the passcode and put in, I don't know, so much of money into these kind of games and lose it in like a couple of seconds. What is your take on this? Like, how do parents or uh, tell their kids the difference between these kind of games?
No, this is a big one, right? So because most video games, even the classic video games with things like loot boxes, that's gambling packed in. And when you look at something like Dream 11, which every cricketer and role model of male sports in India is advertising, which is in a sense a variation of gambling. How do you kind of explain this? And you've hit the hammer on the nail, correct? So a lot of gaming companies in India today are figuring out ways to get licensed by something called the UK Gaming Licenses Act and stuff like that, which allows for these systems to kind of come. Right. So this is, I think, one of the most difficult intersections we are trying to navigate, because in India we have always made sure that gambling hasn't been legal. Correct. We have always looked at it as a social evil or a moral evil. Correct. But for gaming companies, it's a source of revenue. Correct. So that cross is very difficult. And I think with games especially, it's very, very important for us to tell young people at what point they're spending money and how, no matter how the money is garbed, as gold or as imaginary currencies or as V-Bucks in Fortnite, it is still actual money. It has an actual connection, which requires labor, which requires effort. And the same money that goes into buying that limited edition purple skin in Fortnite will pay for a burger or will pay for electricity, will also pay for probably tuition fees in school. right? So that connection needs to be explained. So Trishant, I'll tell you, up to 2017, correct? Most Indian mobile gamers very smart guys, correct? So the moment they would encounter the first microtransaction, and they would know that I cannot cross this level if I don't put actual money, they would find a new game. And I had seen this among all the mobile gamers I'm studying, correct? But something's changed since then, correct? The belief. So what has happened is they've stopped looking at it as an expenditure and started looking at it as what is the possible reward. And there the problem has begun to come. Right? So when you look at Dream 11, you do not look at it as what do you say? Oh my God, I have to spend some money to play this game, and then I have to put in the effort to play the game. You look at it as nobody knows more about cricket than I do. That money is mine, and that's where the problem kind of comes. Correct. So these navigations of gambling and gaming are going to be very, very, very difficult, especially considering most gambling events are being built with principles of gamification. Right. So that I think for the next 6 to 7 years legally is our biggest challenge. How do we separate the two? Right? How do we make games young people friendly, kid friendly, children friendly? How do we make gambling distinct? How do we mark to our people that this is gambling? Please no, correct? And yeah, and even if a child figures out a way of unknowingly spending, exorbitant amount of money, do we have mechanisms for refunds? Correct. That's the bigger thing, because in the West it's very common, right? Within a week you can claim refunds if excessive spending is that, and the companies will refund. But India doesn't have anything like that. So how do we navigate?
Thank you so much. That was very wonderfully answered. Um, Again, lastly, like it's almost going to be 12:30. We should call off the session. Before that, thank you so much, Aditya. Thank you, Usha ma'am. Thank you, Teacher Plus, for conducting this event. And let's hope to have such talks again soon on different topics related to gaming. Um, with this, I'd like to announce the closure of the session. Thank you so much. And Aditya sir, if you could please join us in the breakout room, you'll see the link right away on your screen. Ma'am, if you could please join the link as well.